This time, we're going to talk about writing bots with somebody who actually does write bots. My colleague in the Quartz Bot Studio, bot editor Emily Withrow. Thank you for doing
Hello.
this with me. This is great.
Sure.
Emily, I know you talk to a lot of bots. What do you see that makes an okay bot different from a really good bot?
Sure. So I think, in the realm of okay bots pass the bar of um, letting you know what they're about, letting you know what you can do, allowing you to explore and discover things. But I think what the difference between an okay bot and something that's actually really good is taking the user into account. A lot of bots think about things like navigation almost as if it's web navigation, right? But you really do have to think of it as a dialogue, and you're not just writing your own part of the dialogue. We have our own agenda as storytellers or as people who are building bots, but you have to think about the other part of the dialogue. What are they going to say? What are they going to ask? What options could you give them, and could you give those a voice as well instead of just keeping all of the voice to yourself?
So then how do you keep it conversational? Like what do you write? How do you write this so it's conversational?
So it is very much sort of a test out loud kind of thing. I say don't write anything that sounds jumbled in your mouth, right? Don't write anything that you wouldn't say to a friend. You want to make it chatty, but also sort of a cleaned up best case scenario version of yourself, so that it is conversational. You're thinking about, instead of saying, according to this expert, you might say, I talked to this expert, right? It's just a slightly more casual frame on things. And the test for myself is that I always go and talk to it constantly. And as soon as you read that text message that says something kind of clunky, you think that would be a weird text message to receive. And that's kind of my flag that I need to go back and edit it some more.
So do you actually go into either the Dexter interface or Facebook and actually try it out and talk to your bot? Do you say it out loud? What's your process?
It's a constant chatting with myself, really. I tend to do a first pass just as a straight kind of dialogue, but then I take it into Dexter and then Facebook, so that I am chatting with myself constantly. And I'll say, oh, that sounds a little awkward. I go and change it. I try it again. It still seems awkward. I go and I change it. I try it again until it sounds like something that I would receive, I guess, from a friend and not think this is really strange. And you have to think about length too, right? You don't necessarily want your friends to be sending you these giant text bubbles all in a row. So I also think about how much I want to tell people at once. And again, when you're in that environment, when you're in sort of the Facebook chat environment, it's really easy to see that you've gone overboard.
And you use a lot of images and buttons, even if there's not a choice to be made, sometimes you stick a button in.
Yes, that is true. And again, that's sort of giving the user something fun and exciting to do. Like if you are just focusing on yourself and you're part of the dialogue, they don't feel like they're doing anything. And it's a real difference, I would say, between like the passive experience of sort of giving somebody a few buttons and the active experience of acting or asking them to type something. So I would think about, where are your users? What are they doing? What do you think is the preferred experience for them? Sometimes you can't use a button because you need to know what state they live in or what country they live in, that kind of thing. But we do oftentimes, even when we give buttons, we're also sort of prepared on the back end if they type anything too. But you do sort of keep it visually interesting. Sometimes those buttons are really just something to help with the flow so that you're not just on monologue mode, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I know you teach people how to do this. Do you often suggest that somebody write it out in like a Google Doc first or something like that, or do you go right into Dexter? What do you think is the workflow for this?
When I first started doing this, I would start in Google Docs, but I really quickly switched my workflow to just sort of exclusively writing in Dexter. And part of the reason is I think you find yourself more aware of the paths that you're creating. So, the more branching you introduce, the more copy you have to write. And so as soon as if I put three buttons, I go ahead and write those three triggers, and it keeps me sort of aware of how deep I'm getting myself into this. So I'll often use that as a cue to sort of go back and maybe take out a button. Um, yeah, and then I switch over to Facebook for sort of the editing process.
And a lot of bots have a real voice. In the prep for this class, I had folks look at Pancho, which has a really strong voice.
Very
When you
strong.
write, you have a very friendly voice that is not dissimilar from you, but I think it's a little bit different. How do you adjust the editorial voice of the bot?
So, I think generally speaking, people want to talk to something that's positive, but not overly like chipper and chirpy, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, a lot of the edits that I have to make to myself are edits for sarcasm or sort of cynicism that might creep into the voice. Because when, you have to sort of account for all users, and you don't want to um, create so much voice that like the personality is going to turn people off. I've talked to a lot of bots that are like, either seem almost a little too like they're trying too hard, right? Like that's sort of what happens is you feel the writing a lot as opposed to just thinking, oh, I'm talking, right? And so I would discourage people from using too many sort of like internet slang type things where you're trying to show that, you're hip or whatever. So it's a combination of sort of playing it straight and then introducing some humor here and there. And I also really like to give humor to the user instead of keeping it to myself. So a lot of times the buttons that I do offer people will be the funny part because then they get to feel like they're being funny as opposed to just always playing straight to whatever I'm doing.
Oh, so you're putting the humor in the button choices, and that becomes
Right.
playful. Yeah,
Yes.
awesome.
Yes.
Emily, thank you so much for doing this. I really
Of course.
appreciate it.
Yeah,
Emily
absolutely.
Withrow is the bot editor for the Quartz Bot Studio. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you.